Alright, what do we got today, YouTube? Recently I had some problems in my Chevy C1500. It's a 93. It's a 4L60E transmission, and the connector plug had broken its little adapters. I mean, the thing's 30 years old, and so the plug had gotten pushed into the electrical connection had gotten pushed to the inside of the transmission. So I replaced it, and while I was inside, I decided to do the solenoids. Well, I put everything back together, and she drove like a dream. And about 15 minutes, 20 minutes in, after a good heat soak of the transmission, it would go into limp mode. Limp mode in a 4L60E is third gear. No electrical power to it because the solenoids can't fire, and so it stays in third gear. That was a pain in the butt. Well, obviously I knew it was an electrical issue because I had just done the harness and the solenoids, but the question is, why in the world is it intermittent? Why does it work when it's cold but not hot? So I needed to gather a bunch of data. When you've got an intermittent electrical issue, they're difficult to chase down. And after futzing with it for a while and doing the tests I could do from the outside, I decided I really needed to see what was going on in the transmission. And then I built this monitoring harness, and I'm going to show you what it is. This is nothing but 12 leads from point to point. So one wire goes all the way through about 12, 15 feet to the other side. It contains all the leads that my 93 4L60E transmission puts out. We've got male banana plugs. Here, they're stackable. Male banana plugs, and we've got protected insulated female banana plugs here. Once again, this is just 12 conductors running straight through, and it's about 15 feet long. So this gets me the information to the inside of the vehicle's cab. Here is the meat. This basically is an adapter that runs from the harness that comes from the ECM, plugs into this in the vehicle, and then this end plugs in the transmission, and then this gives me all my pins. R, P, and the E pin is the big one on the 4L60E because that's where the power comes in. That's where the power to operate all the solenoids comes into the transmission. So this basically this is T. This gives me the ability to inject and monitor everything that's going on electrically inside the transmission. Now, how did I build it? You can buy these adapter kits on eBay, and they're for converting a 4L60E connection to like a 4L80 transmission. And I bought two of them. Why? Because my particular transmission was missing, needed an extra lead, and I didn't have the ability to pin these, so I bought two of them. They're only like $20 per harness, and I stole the wire off of one and used it to build a 12 lead harness right here. And obviously I've tapped into the wires to join these two, and these are the connections. But the really nice thing is I was able to find an intermittent short between the 3-2 downshift solenoid with this. And I could use LED lights in the cab to show me which circuits were being fired for which solenoids. And I could do amp readings. I could, while the vehicle was hot and everything was still in the transmission, I could feed 12 volts to each individual solenoid and ground it, and I could take amperage measurements for each solenoid to make sure they were in spec. And cold, the 3-2 downshift solenoid would pull about 0.4 amps, and after heat soak it would go to open circuit. It would go to completely open circuit, so no amps. And then I was able to, it's either a problem with the harness or it's a problem with the solenoid. And after I gathered enough data, I got into the transmission again, and sure enough, the solenoid had a bent pin, slightly bent pin, and when you put the electrical clip in it, it pushed the female pin in the connector out the backside. So they were touching each other when cold, and when it got heat soaked, there was enough expansion in the plastic that it pulled the two pieces apart, and the 3-2 shift solenoid then is inoperable because it's not getting any electrical power. And the funny thing is, I think it also, the ECM on that old 93 noticed the problem with the 3-2 and then shut down all the power to the transmission because the thing would just go dark and it would go into third gear limp mode. Now I had indicator lights, little LED, very like 20 milliamp draw indicator lights that I would feed power to outside of this. It would use the ground provided by the computer for the transmission so that I could see things light up as they were being commanded to by the ECM. But the funny thing is, when I had the lights hooked up, I had incandescent lights the first time, and it wouldn't go south when it heat soaked. And then I thought, well, maybe they're pulling too much juice and backfeeding the rest of the bus, because this time I didn't know whether the harness was causing the problems or whether it was an individual solenoid. And then I changed it out to LEDs because I figured that small amount of power juice wouldn't, but even then, with the LEDs hooked up, the transmission would function even though the 3-2 downshift solenoid had disconnected itself because of heat soak. Strange, but once again, all that electronic stuff that's going on inside those ECM brain boxes, you know, we just don't know exactly everything that goes on and how they're programmed until you run into this kind of situation. Anywho, yesterday I did pull the transmission apart and found the issue with the 3-2 downshift solenoid and the bent connector plug and the goobered up female connector clip. I replaced it with a name brand harness and a GM original equipment solenoid, and she's back up and functioning. But anywho, this little harness right here that I built was a lifesaver in terms of getting me to find where to pay attention to in the internals of that particular transmission. And there's all the pins labeled so that when you're hooking things up and you're taking readings, you know exactly which solenoid and which control manifold pressure switch you're taking a look at, and power delivery. E is the 12 volts into the transmission for a 4L60E. Anywho, that's it. I'll give you some ideas if you're at home and you're got a goofy ass electrical transmission problem, and you know, sometimes you got to build your own tools. All right. Thank you, YouTube. We'll talk to you later.